Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, we're going to hear from the folks from Common Cause about a variety of election reforms, but first, guess what? A grand jury spent nearly 2 years investigating 6 Roman Catholic dioceses. It's with complaints, allegations about sexual abuse. It's not a Pennsylvania story alone. It's not a national story alone. It's an international story, and we'll get to all of that after these words.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Welcome back to the program. Well, joining me to cover, they're 2 of the state's leading reporters. They've written about this subject. They've read a good bit of the report. I'll ask you, I don't think anybody has read all 1,300 pages, but knowing them, they probably have. I'm chatting about Marc Levy. He's with the Associated Press, and Angela Couloumbis with the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Philadelphia Daily News, and sometimes the Pittsburgh Post. Do I got that?
You got everything.
Yeah, all right. Well, Angela, let's start with you. I mean, rumors had existed for years about whether or not there was abuse of kids by people involved with the Catholic Church. Sure. Not just priests, but clerics and other church officials. Could anyone have imagined the scope of this? First, describe the scope of it.
The scope is it's 1,300 pages detailing 7 decades worth of abuse by over 300 priests involving over 1,000 victims. And the systemic and deliberate cover-up of that abuse by church officials. And the details of this report, people have read it, they are sickening.
Yeah, no. And I think what's stunning about it, Mark, is we're not just talking about a handful of people. I mean, the numbers involved and the cover-up, I mean, it's beyond stunning.
It is staggering, and what you have now are current bishops, former bishops, bishops who have been promoted. There's now the Cardinal of Washington, D.C., who are defending their actions because they are in these reports. What the grand jury was able to do was to subpoena the internal secret archives of 6 Catholic dioceses in Pennsylvania. Right. And the extent of it is staggering. The grand jury itself said that we don't think we got them all. Some victims never came forward, and some records perhaps disappeared or went missing.
Yeah. I mean, you can imagine the victims that just, as Mark pointed out, Angela, that it happened, they didn't come forward, they let it alone. It's something they had to live with the rest of their lives. But back in the day, in the culture, in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, I mean, you just didn't talk about it.
Right, and one of the findings that the grand jury spelled out very clearly was that they believed that the cover-up was deliberate in the sense that if you covered up these crimes for a period of time, then the statute of limitations would run, and they do not become prosecutable as a result.
Yeah, I want to talk about a little bit about what is there a role for the legislature in the governor on this, but but back to the report, I do think we do have to be a little careful. There may be people individually who were charged, Mark, or not charged, but allegations made that simply aren't true. I mean, we can't rule that out in some cases, but when you have over 1,000, there's a systemic problem within the church.
And the church's own records confirm a lot of what priests knew or bishops knew, but we're not telling the public, we're not telling law enforcement. Correct. What the report also found is that law enforcement occasionally was complicit in deferring allegations and complaints to the Catholic Church, saying, we will back off, you deal with it, instead of investigating what I think anyone would look at and believe is a criminal allegation that should be investigated by law enforcement.
Yeah, if there's no positive side to this, I will never say that, but at least at the moment, it looks like many church officials have come forward, and on the record, they're saying we're going to root this out.
The church has made a tremendous number of reforms since this became a national and then international crisis dating back to 2002. And they have instituted changes that would permit and really force the notifying law enforcement when these types of allegations occur. And obviously, in Pennsylvania, the dioceses, all of them have come out strongly denouncing this type of behavior and committing themselves again to trying to root out this problem.
And what she said is a good point, that the vast majority of these cases appear to have occurred before 1990. The church began making changes in the late 80s. 2002 was a watershed year for the church when the Boston Globe's report came out in terms of making changes, instituting internal processes, getting better at reporting to law enforcement. But, you know, one point that victim advocates have made is that these 6 dioceses that were investigated had never unveiled a list of accused priests until just before the report came out, or just after it came out.
All right, we're going to run to a break. When we come back, is there a role for the legislature? Are there things that the legislature and the governor can do to help this process along? We'll get to that in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
All right, we're chatting, unfortunately, about the grand jury report that points out that there were innumerable, you almost don't know how to describe it, escapades, accounts, episodes of child abuse in the more than 1,300 abusers, individuals, clerics, priests, and others in the Catholic Church. And so I'll start with you, Mark. The legislature has a role to play. What is it that's before the legislature that could help move this along?
So there's a couple things that have actually gotten significant debate the last 2 years following the last grand jury report on the Altoona-Johnstown diocese, and that is raising the statute of limitations to give prosecutors more time to pursue allegations of child sexual abuse. Raising the limit, the time, or expanding the time period in which a victim of child sexual abuse has to sue their victimizer for civil damages.
Yeah. Did a bill similar pass the Senate, right? And it's in the House, and I know this. Go ahead.
So there's competing bills that have passed both chambers, but in this session, a bill passed the Senate,
right.
And we expect action on it in the House in the fall. But there is one key flashpoint of disagreement.
Yeah.
Yes.
So go ahead.
I was going to say that flashpoint is whether to permit this window, like a 2-year window, to allow victims who have aged out of the statute of limitations to go back and sue civilly.
Yeah, I mean, this occurred, I mean, some of the victims are now, in their 70s and even into the 80s. Mm-hmm. And that time frame is certainly important. Mm-hmm. There's also the grand jury, I'm reading here, the grand jury said church officials going back decades insisted they had no duty to report to law enforcement when they learned about abuse. I mean, that's almost mind-boggling in and of itself.
Well, a lot of those, we saw a lot of those child abuse laws tightened after the Penn State and Jerry Sandusky scandal. So a lot of, laws involving reporting and who needs to report have already been tightened. But I think what the legislature is going to try to tackle in the very few days, session days it has left in this 2-year session, is the question of the so-called retroactivity. Yeah. Can these older victims go back and sue?
Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask you a real tough question. I'm going to put you on the spot. Do you think the legislature, 10 voting session days, something like that, remaining? Mm-hmm. We wouldn't want them to stay in too long before their own elections. They never do. What's your sense? Now, you at the AP and you obviously at the Inquirer, you've been getting calls about this. You've read of these. I mean, there's a huge amount of pressure on the legislature to do something. Am I right or wrong about that?
There is, and we saw it when the Johnstown-Altoona report came out in the spring of 2016, that it propelled this debate again. We saw it after a Philadelphia grand jury report on the Philadelphia Archdiocese in 2005. It propelled another debate to expand the statute of limitations. And so the question is whether something will pass. So a bill did pass in 2006. Right. But nothing has passed the chambers, at least nothing has gone into law since the Johnstown-Altoona report in 2016.
Well, not to get into get too much detail, but the majority leader of the House, and obviously a very important individual, Dave Reed, right? He has said and made it very clear that they're going to do something about this. Is that correct?
Yes, we had a story about that today. He is committed to bringing a bill up for a vote. The question is how much heavy politicking and lobbying is there going to be to try and keep that retroactivity clause out of it?
Out of it. Right.
Yeah.
Right. And the Senate has steadfastly opposed that, whereas the retroactivity provision did pass the House 2 years ago.
Yeah. Now, my sense, the governor put out a statement, but he's been fairly, I'm not being critical of him. I mean, it's obvious that there's more to play out in this, but my sense is the governor's likely to sign on. I mean, go ahead.
2 years ago, he was supportive of a retroactivity measure. So I think once he sees a very specific policy proposal, my sense is he will be on board with it and sign it into law.
But I haven't read, and I try to follow the legislature and activities, but I haven't read much opposition to some of these reforms that get proposed. I mean, as an observer, it's hard for me to believe that something doesn't happen of some significance here.
So there is widespread support in the legislature for expanding the statute of limitations for criminal purposes, for prosecutors to pursue allegations longer into the life of a child victim, of a one-time child victim. But that has stalled as part of a package of reforms primarily because of disagreement over the retroactivity provision. And the church and the insurance industry has opposed that retroactivity provision, and there's debate among legal scholars as to whether it's constitutional.
All right, well, thanks for coming in for this very important update. All right, Common Cause election reform, November 6th is going to be here sooner than we all expect.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Welcome back. Well, we're going to turn our attention to elections. November 6th is a big day, and Micah Sims, he's the executive director of Common Cause of Pennsylvania, joins me to have a discussion about a variety of things related to elections. Now, we've already had these.
Yes.
They took place. When was that? It's so long ago, I can't remember.
Was it May? The primary was in May. Seems you're right. So long ago.
Who can remember?
Right.
But the point is, your organization and you are big supporters of what's called open primaries.
Yes. Open primaries, what we believe that since the taxpayers are paying for our elections, we believe that everybody should have the opportunity to vote, no matter whether you're a registered Democrat, Republican, or non-affiliated, which most people would know as independents. Right. We believe that it's now time for independents to have that right to vote in the primary across Pennsylvania.
Okay, so in Pennsylvania right now we have a closed primary,
right.
which means if you're a Democrat, you can vote for Democratic candidates in the primary. Now in the general election, obviously that you can vote for anybody you want.
Yeah, right.
You can write some name in too.
That's
right?
true.
And Republicans for Republican candidates. How do you answer the other side of it, which is, well, you're not a member of my party. Why should you be able to pick a candidate from a party you're not a member of?
I think the response back to that, Terry, is if the parties were paying for the primary election, they could have that right. But parties don't pay for the primary election. And so if I'm a registered independent, I want to be able to go into the ballot booth, really, and not only just vote for initiatives, but also cast my vote for state rep or city council or school board during the primary.
Now,
I think that's fair.
These closed primaries have been around historically since now, but you think some leaders in the legislature might be coming forward? Talk about that.
Yeah, I was actually a little bit shocked. I know this has been something that Common Cause has been really adamantly pushing for a number of decades, and to find out we actually had an advocate in Majority Leader Dave Reed, and then on top of that to find out that Senator Scarnati was interested in a bill as well. So Senator Reed put out a bill, House Bill 2448, in the last session during the spring, which we are hopeful that will get out of Rules Committee and actually come to the floor. And I'm interested, and we're actually talking to Senator Scarnati's office about the language for their bill.
Yeah, and we were talking about they have a whole 10 session days. We wouldn't want to keep them in too long through the fall. So
well, they're not going to want to stay in for so long. Everybody wants to get out and campaign. You're right. You're right.
All right, let's talk about voting modernization. We've been through, I remember the days, mechanical lever, you had to push each individual lever.
Yes.
And now we have the hacking situation that goes on. And your organization has been behind a number of what you call, I think, voter modernization efforts. Tell our viewers about what you think ought to occur.
Yeah, Terry, voting modernization basically is saying that we really believe in having a secure, fair election. And that's what it does. We realize that there are people who believe in the hacking narrative. There are people who believe in the voting error narrative. The best thing we can do is to just modernize our systems. Most of us have cell phones, and we usually upgrade them. Why don't we do the same thing in reference to our voting systems? And we believe that as the governor has done an executive order asking counties to modernize their systems by 2020.
I hate to bring this up, but at some point, are we going to vote on these things?
Well, I think we're going to have to let technology, and we're going to have to do some work before we do that, Terry. I really believe. Yeah. It seems as if, ironically, that we're going backwards, and this is what I mean. We're hearing a lot of things about paper ballots. Yeah. We're hearing a lot of things about vote by mail.
Hold on. At least with paper ballots, and you have a trail.
Correct.
I mean, we want a paper trail, don't we?
We do want a paper trail, which makes sense, which was part of what the governor has asked for, and which we are certainly encouraging and support that type of effort as we're doing new voting machines. But back to your point, it's time to modernize. We really need to have a better database, et cetera.
We're going to run to a break. Yep. I want to get, when we come back, to something you call voting accessibility, and if we have time, we got a little thing called the census coming up. We'll see if we can get to both of those subjects after we pay some bills.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
Welcome back. I'm chatting with Micah Sims. He's the Executive Director of the Common Cause of Pennsylvania. We're talking about all things relating to elections and voting, open primaries, voting modernization. And there's something that you call voter accessibility. What's that about?
So voting accessibility really speaks to the fact that in Pennsylvania right now, Terry, we have absentee ballots, but they are not no excuse absentee ballots. So in other words,
what's that mean?
If you're like working and you can't make it to vote, you right now cannot use an absentee ballot. There are only certain excuses that deem viable for that ballot to count.
That's right.
And so why can't
that.
we do no excuse absentee ballot? What happens if my child gets sick on election day and I have to take them to the doctor? Does that dismiss my ability to be able to vote? It should not. So if we went to no excuse absentee ballots, I think that would help the Commonwealth. Two is, I know it's been reported recently that the time frame on absentee ballots really needs to be analyzed. As you know, in Pennsylvania, you have up until the Tuesday before election to mail in your absentee ballot, and it has to be mailed in by that same Friday. That is a really tight deadline, one that really needs to be looked at. And actually, when we looked at it in the election code, it's just a simple tweak in the election code within a sentence. We do believe that it is really time to really look at how we extend that period of time and give people more time and actually make more options, because we believe no excuse absentee ballot is really the way to go.
Yeah. And then there's something that you call pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds. What's that mean? They can pre-register to vote before they reach 18?
Correct. I actually have a couple of 16-year-olds in my house right now.
I know why you want to do it.
Well, I mean, you hear their friends talk about it, and you hear, Mr. Sims, I'm responsible enough to get a driver's license. I think I'm responsible enough to vote. And I go, well, not yet. We've got a national law. But it kind of clicked and said, maybe we ought to look at pre-registering our 16 and 17-year-olds, get them ready so that automatically, when they become 18, they automatically go out and they know they have the right to vote.
Well, I get your point. That might also, by the pre-registration, build a backlog of people who are prepared to vote and they don't have to.
Correct.
I got it.
And if we can modernize our stuff, we can hold the database.
All right, we have less than 2 minutes to go, but I want to ask you about Census 2020. It's coming up. It's important for lots of different reasons, for all kinds of federal programs and in which you get money from the federal government based on population.
Sure.
I won't even get into the congressional and other districts. Go ahead, take it away.
2020 census is coming up. We've got a little tweak, a little bit of a change. People like my mother are accustomed to getting the actual survey in the mail. This time you're actually going to get a code. And it's going to go, you have to go online to do actually the first alliteration of the census. If you don't do it online the first time, then the second time, you're then able to get a mail-in census ballot, a survey that you can send back through the mail. So it's a little different. It's a tweak to it.
So let me understand this. So you'll be able to do it online, answer the census.
Correct.
And then if not, then you'll
receive one in the mail, a hard copy, and fill out the survey. So what the census is doing is trying to save money, but what we have found out is this could be a bit of a problem for people who don't have broadband access, particularly in our rural and urban communities. So that's something some of our Common Cause and our allies, both in the state and nationally, are working on.
Okay. I don't know that we're going to have time to get into this, but at some point I want to have you back and I want to talk about the citizenship question. It's a big issue nationally. Whether I can see a little bit of both sides about that, and it's a tough question. But at any rate, thanks for coming in. We appreciate it.
Terry, thank you for having me.
All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.